The liar paradox presents a statement that refers to itself in a way that creates a logical contradiction. This sentence is false. If we assume the sentence is true, then, as it asserts, it must be false. Conversely, if we assume it is false, then it must be true. This self-referential loop challenges our understanding of truth and falsehood. Historically, this paradox is attributed to the ancient Greek philosopher Epimenides, who stated, "All Cretans are liars." Since Epimenides was a Cretan, his statement implies that he is lying, leading to a paradox. Philosophers and logicians have proposed various approaches to resolve this paradox. Alfred Tarski suggested that such paradoxes arise in languages that allow sentences to reference their own truthfulness, proposing a hierarchy of languages to prevent self-referential inconsistencies. Saul Kripke introduced the concept of grounded and ungrounded statements, suggesting that self-referential statements like the liar paradox are ungrounded and lack a clear truth value. In modern contexts, the liar paradox has implications in fields like computer science and artificial intelligence, where self-referential systems must be carefully managed to avoid logical inconsistencies. Reflecting on this paradox invites us to consider the complexities of language and the nature of truth, offering a contemplative journey into the depths of logic and philosophy. Zeno of Elea, a pre-Socratic philosopher from the 5th century BC, introduced several paradoxes that challenge our understanding of motion and change. One of his most renowned arguments is the dichotomy paradox, which posits that motion is an illusion. To illustrate this, imagine a runner aiming to reach a finish line. Before arriving at the destination, the runner must first cover half the distance. Subsequently, they must cover half of the remaining distance, then half of that, and so on. This sequence suggests an infinite number of halfway points the runner must traverse, leading to the conclusion that completing the journey is impossible, as it would require completing an infinite number of tasks. This paradox raises profound questions about the nature of space, time, and infinity. In the realm of mathematics, the concept of convergent series offers insight into this conundrum. While the number of divisions is infinite, the total distance remains finite, and the sum of the infinite series of distances can converge to a finite limit. This mathematical perspective suggests that, despite the infinite subdivisions, the runner can indeed reach the destination. However, Zeno's paradox continues to inspire philosophical discussions about the nature of reality, motion, and the limitations of human perception. Reflecting on the dichotomy paradox invites a contemplative exploration of how we understand movement and the continuum of space and time, offering a serene journey into the depths of philosophical inquiry. Buridan's ass is a philosophical paradox that explores the complexities of decision-making and free will. Imagine a donkey, equally hungry and thirsty, placed exactly midway between a stack of hay and a pail of water. With no preference for either, the donkey faces a dilemma: which to choose first. Caught in this indecision, the donkey may ultimately starve from both hunger and thirst. This scenario illustrates the challenges of making choices when options are equally appealing. The paradox is named after the 14th century French philosopher Jean Buridan, who used it to discuss moral determinism. However, the concept predates him, appearing in Aristotle's writings. Philosophers have long debated this paradox, considering whether true free will exists or if our choices are determined by prior causes. Some argue that the donkey's fate highlights the limitations of rational decision-making when faced with equally attractive options. In modern times, this paradox has been applied to various fields, including psychology and digital electronics. For instance, in digital circuits, a system may struggle to decide between two states when inputs are undefined, leading to a state of indecision known as metastability. Reflecting on Buridan's ass encourages contemplation of how we make choices and the nature of free will, offering a serene journey into the depths of philosophical inquiry. The unexpected hanging paradox presents a thought-provoking scenario that challenges our understanding of expectation and surprise. Imagine a judge sentences a prisoner to be hanged at noon on one weekday in the coming week, with the stipulation that the execution will be a surprise to the prisoner. The prisoner, upon hearing this, begins to reason through the judge's statement. He concludes that the hanging cannot occur on Friday, because if he hasn't been hanged by Thursday, then Friday would be the only remaining day, making the hanging predictable and thus not a surprise. Applying the same logic, he eliminates Thursday, reasoning that if he hasn't been hanged by Wednesday, Thursday would be the only day left, and so on, until he concludes that the hanging cannot occur on any day of the week. However, on Wednesday, the executioner arrives, and the hanging takes place, catching the prisoner by surprise. This paradox highlights the complexities of expectation and knowledge, illustrating how logical reasoning can lead to unexpected outcomes. It serves as a reminder of the limitations of human reasoning and the unpredictable nature of life, inviting us to reflect on the nature of surprise and the assumptions we make about the future. The Raven Paradox, also known as Hempel's Paradox, delves into the intricacies of inductive reasoning and how we gather evidence to support hypotheses. Consider the hypothesis: all ravens are black. Observing a black raven seems to provide direct evidence supporting this statement. However, the paradox arises when we consider that the contrapositive of this hypothesis is all non-black things are non-ravens. Therefore, observing a green apple, a non-black, non-raven object, also serves as evidence supporting the original hypothesis. This conclusion feels counterintuitive, as we wouldn't typically consider the color of apples when evaluating the color of ravens. The paradox highlights the complexities of confirmation theory and the challenges in determining what constitutes relevant evidence. Philosophers and logicians have explored this paradox to understand the relationship between evidence and hypothesis testing. Some argue that while observing a green apple does technically support the hypothesis, the amount of support is negligible compared to observing a black raven. This discussion underscores the importance of context and relevance in scientific inquiry and everyday reasoning. Reflecting on the Raven Paradox encourages a deeper contemplation of how we form beliefs and the nature of evidence, offering a serene journey into the depths of philosophical thought. The Barber Paradox is a self-referential paradox first formulated by the renowned philosopher and logician Bertrand Russell in 1901. It arises from a seemingly simple scenario, yet it reveals a deep and complex issue in logic and set theory, which has had lasting implications on the foundations of mathematics and our understanding of paradoxes. Imagine a barber who lives in a small town. This barber has a very particular role. He shaves every man in the town who does not shave himself, and he does not shave any man who shaves himself. The rule is simple: the barber will shave all those who do not shave themselves, and only those who do not shave themselves. Now, let's think carefully about this situation and the logical question it presents. Does the barber shave himself? At first glance, this might seem like a harmless scenario. But as we begin to analyze it, the paradox becomes clear. If the barber shaves himself, according to the rule, he must not shave himself because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if the barber does not shave himself, then, according to the rule, he must shave himself because he shaves all those who do not shave themselves. This creates an irreconcilable contradiction. If the barber shaves himself, he cannot, and if he does not shave himself, he must. Thus, we are faced with a situation that does not have a clear resolution. This paradox highlights a critical flaw in naive set theory, which deals with the concept of sets, collections of objects, and how they interact with each other. In traditional logic, sets are defined by certain properties, and elements are classified as either belonging or not belonging to those sets. The Barber Paradox shows us that there are situations where these classifications break down when sets are defined in a self-referential way. In this case, the set of people who are shaved by the barber can be considered a set, but the self-referential nature of the barber's role, shaving only those who do not shave themselves, leads to a contradiction. This paradox also illustrates an issue in formal systems of logic, particularly in set theory. The paradox is related to a broader class of paradoxes known as Russell's paradox, which Russell himself discovered while working on the foundations of set theory. In set theory, one of the main ideas is that sets can be defined by a property they share. For example, a set could consist of all red objects or all even numbers. But what happens when we try to define a set that contains itself as a member? This is the problem that arises in the Barber paradox. The barber is both part of the set of people who do not shave themselves and part of the set of people who are shaved by the barber. This self-referential nature leads to the paradox. The Barber paradox teaches us an important lesson about the limitations of certain logical systems. When we try to create sets or define objects in a way that refers to themselves, we can easily encounter contradictions. These contradictions are not merely intellectual curiosities. They have real implications for fields like mathematics and philosophy. Russell's paradox and the Barber paradox forced logicians to rethink the foundations of set theory, leading to the development of more rigorous systems, such as Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory, which avoids such self-referential problems. In conclusion, the Barber paradox is not just a simple thought experiment, it's a profound illustration of the limitations of self-referential logic and set theory. It encourages us to consider the boundaries of logic and reasoning, and how seemingly innocuous assumptions about sets and membership can lead to contradictions. The paradox also serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities involved in understanding the very nature of sets and the rules that govern logical systems. While the barber may not exist in reality, the paradox he presents continues to challenge our understanding of logic and mathematics. Through this paradox, we are reminded that even in the world of pure thought, contradictions can arise, forcing us to reconsider how we define and categorize the world around us. The Sorites Paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap, is a fascinating philosophical problem that arises from the vagueness inherent in certain concepts. The paradox can be described through a simple scenario involving a heap of sand, yet it forces us to confront the difficulties of defining concepts that lack clear-cut boundaries. It is a paradox that illustrates the challenges of distinguishing between precise and imprecise terms, and it reveals how small, seemingly insignificant changes can lead to surprising contradictions. To begin, imagine a large heap of sand. This heap is clearly a heap, and we can easily say that it contains many grains of sand. Now, suppose that we remove one grain of sand from the heap. Does the removal of a single grain change the fact that we still have a heap of sand? Most people would likely agree that the remaining sand still forms a heap, albeit a slightly smaller one. So, we continue the process, removing one grain at a time, each time asking whether the remaining sand still qualifies as a heap. With each grain removed, we still perceive a heap, but eventually we are left with just a single grain of sand. At this point, we can no longer reasonably describe it as a heap. Yet, according to the logic of the process, it seems that a single grain of sand must have been a heap at some earlier point. This leads to the paradox. At what exact point does a heap stop being a heap? The Sorites Paradox highlights the difficulties in drawing clear lines around concepts that are inherently vague. Words like heap, tall, or rich have a kind of flexibility in their meaning, depending on context. There is no precise cutoff for when a heap stops being a heap, or when someone stops being considered tall or rich. The paradox arises because, in theory, any number of small changes, like removing a single grain of sand, should not drastically alter the category. But when repeated, these small changes seem to lead to a contradiction. This is the essence of the paradox. Small incremental changes don't seem to change the nature of something, yet when these changes are accumulated over time, they result in a dramatic shift that challenges our initial understanding. The paradox challenges our reliance on precise categories and invites us to question how we define things in our everyday lives. If we remove one grain of sand from a heap, we intuitively think it still qualifies as a heap. But if we remove thousands of grains, we eventually reach the point where we no longer think of it as a heap at all. The dilemma lies in determining the threshold, the precise moment when a heap stops being a heap and becomes something else, like a pile or just a single grain of sand. This paradox also touches on issues in the philosophy of language and epistemology, the study of knowledge. How do we know when something transitions from one category to another, especially when those categories are vague and ill-defined? What makes heap a heap, and what makes tall a person who is tall? The Sorites Paradox forces us to confront the limitations of our language and the difficulty in defining concepts with inherent vagueness. While we can agree that a heap of sand is a heap, there is no clear line that separates a heap from a non-heap, and this lack of a sharp boundary is what creates the paradox. In practical terms, the Sorites Paradox can be applied to many real-world situations. For example, think of someone who is gradually losing their hair. If one hair is lost, it might not be noticeable. As more hairs fall out, there comes a point where they are considered bald, but the transition is gradual and hard to pinpoint. Similarly, in legal or moral contexts, the paradox raises questions about when a behavior crosses the line from acceptable to unacceptable. At what point does a small offense become a crime? How many small infractions turn into a serious transgression? These questions reflect the challenges we face in defining and categorizing things in the real world, where boundaries are often blurry. In conclusion, the Sorites Paradox serves as a powerful reminder of the vagueness that permeates many of the concepts we use in everyday life. It challenges our tendency to think in terms of precise black and white categories and forces us to consider the complexity and fluidity of language and thought. The paradox shows that there are often no clear lines between one category and another, and it invites us to think more carefully about how we define concepts and make decisions in a world that is rarely as clear-cut as we would like it to be. As we encounter similar dilemmas in our lives, the Sorites Paradox encourages us to embrace uncertainty and acknowledge that some boundaries may simply not exist. The Ship of Theseus is one of the most famous and enduring paradoxes in philosophy, particularly in the realm of metaphysics, where it explores the nature of identity and change. This paradox challenges our understanding of what makes something fundamentally the same, despite undergoing change over time. The scenario begins with a ship owned by the mythical Greek hero Theseus. Over time, the parts of the ship begin to wear down and are replaced with new, identical parts. Eventually, every single component of the ship is replaced. The question then arises, is the ship still the same Ship of Theseus, or has it become a completely different ship? This seemingly simple question opens up a wide range of philosophical discussions about identity, continuity, and what it means for something to remain the same over time. To break the paradox down, imagine you own a ship, and over the years, various parts begin to decay and break down. As each part of the ship becomes unusable, you replace it with a new part that is identical to the original. First, you replace a few planks of wood. Then, over time, more significant components like the sails, mast, and rudder are replaced. Eventually, after many years, every single part of the ship has been replaced with a new one. At this point, you may ask, is this still the Ship of Theseus? After all, it retains the same design, purpose, and functionality as the original ship, but every physical component has been changed. This is where the paradox arises. On one hand, you could argue that the ship is still the same, as it continues to perform the same role, and it has the same appearance. On the other hand, you could argue that the ship is no longer the Ship of Theseus because it has no original parts left. The identity of the ship seems to be tied not only to its outward appearance and function, but also to its material components. The Ship of Theseus paradox raises important questions about identity that apply to many areas of life. For example, consider the human body. Over the course of a lifetime, human cells are constantly replaced. Our skin cells, hair cells, and even internal organs regenerate. In fact, much of the body is completely renewed every few years. Yet despite this constant change, we still think of ourselves as the same person. We retain our identity even as our bodies transform. The Ship of Theseus presents a similar challenge. How can we consider something the same when it undergoes a gradual process of change? At what point does an object cease to be the original, and what criteria do we use to determine this? Another interesting variation of the Ship of Theseus paradox is the reverse scenario. Imagine that instead of replacing the parts of the ship, you collect the original parts that have been removed over time and reconstruct the ship. Once reassembled, this new ship would contain all the original components, making it the exact same ship. But in a physical sense, it's a completely new object. This brings us to another philosophical question. Which ship is the true Ship of Theseus, the one with the original components, or the one that has been continuously maintained through replacement? This variation of the paradox forces us to examine how we define identity in a deeper sense. Is it about continuity of material, continuity of form, or continuity of function? The Ship of Theseus paradox also touches on issues of personal identity and what it means to remain the same over time. In the context of human beings, we often think of ourselves as continuous, enduring individuals, even though we change physically, emotionally, and psychologically. The paradox pushes us to reflect on whether it is our physical components, our memories, our personalities, or something else entirely that constitutes our identity. Are we defined by our physical bodies, or is there something more abstract that makes us who we are? Ultimately, the Ship of Theseus paradox highlights the complexity of identity and challenges our intuitive understanding of what it means to be the same over time. It suggests that identity may not be a simple matter of continuity, but rather a more fluid and multifaceted concept that involves various factors: material, functional, and even conceptual. The paradox forces us to grapple with the question of how we define sameness and whether there is ever a clear answer to the question of when something truly changes. In conclusion, the Ship of Theseus remains a powerful tool for exploring philosophical questions about identity, change, and continuity. It invites us to examine how we think about objects, people, and concepts that evolve over time, and it challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about what makes something fundamentally the same. Whether applied to ships, bodies, or ideas, the paradox encourages deeper reflection on the nature of existence and the ways in which we understand and experience change. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that identity is not always as fixed as we might believe, and that change, even when gradual, can have profound implications for how we perceive the world around us. The paradox of the court is a fascinating and thought-provoking legal paradox that dates back to ancient Greece. It revolves around a simple yet deeply puzzling situation in which a contract is made between a teacher and a student. The paradox explores issues of justice, logic, and the nature of contracts, while offering a profound exploration of how promises and agreements can become entangled in contradictory outcomes. The story begins with a teacher, Protagoras, who agrees to teach a student, Euathlus, the art of rhetoric, which was a highly valued skill in ancient Greece. In exchange for his instruction, Protagoras demands payment from Euathlus once the student has successfully learned the art of rhetoric. However, Euathlus, the student, enters into a contract where he promises to pay Protagoras the agreed-upon fee, but only after he has won his first legal case using the skills he has learned. At first glance, this agreement seems fair. Protagoras will teach Euathlus the art of rhetoric, and Euathlus will pay Protagoras only when he succeeds in his chosen profession. But here is where the paradox emerges. If Euathlus does not win a case, then he is not required to pay Protagoras. This means that, logically, Euathlus has no incentive to actually use his rhetorical skills in a way that might lead him to win a legal case. Essentially, he could continue to avoid paying Protagoras indefinitely while still receiving his education and benefiting from the teacher's services. On the other hand, Protagoras could also be in a difficult position. If Euathlus does not win a legal case, Protagoras would not receive the payment that was promised. The problem here is that if Protagoras sues Euathlus for non-payment, the case would essentially depend on Euathlus using his rhetoric skills, which he may not have fully mastered. The paradox is in the idea that Protagoras' success in court depends on Euathlus' success in applying rhetoric. In essence, Protagoras could lose the case and be unable to collect the payment, even though the payment was clearly stipulated in the contract. Thus, the paradox presents a situation where both the teacher and the student seem to be in a bind. Protagoras has created a contract that logically seems to ensure he won't receive payment, but at the same time, if he sues, he risks losing due to the very skills he taught Euathlus. The student, Euathlus, has no immediate incentive to take action since he can delay payment indefinitely by not winning a legal case. In essence, the contract creates a circular problem in which neither party can fully benefit without the other fulfilling their obligations first, yet neither is guaranteed to get what they want. This paradox presents deeper philosophical questions about contracts, obligations, and fairness. It invites us to reflect on the complexities of agreements where future actions depend on conditions that may or may not come to fruition. The paradox of the court also asks us to consider the role of justice in a legal context. Should a promise made in a contract be enforceable if the conditions for fulfillment are set up in such a way that they cannot realistically be met? Can a legal agreement truly be considered valid if it creates a situation where neither party stands to gain from it, or where both parties are left in a position of uncertainty? Furthermore, the paradox of the court touches on the idea of power and control within legal and contractual relationships. The relationship between Protagoras and Euathlus is one where both parties have a stake in the success of the contract, but both are vulnerable to the other's actions or inactions. The paradox reveals a subtle power struggle. The teacher relies on the student's success, while the student holds the power to delay payment indefinitely. This dynamic brings up important questions about fairness, justice, and the risks involved in setting up contractual obligations where neither party has a clear way of ensuring the fulfillment of the agreement. The paradox has also been interpreted as a metaphor for more general life situations, where individuals or institutions make agreements that, due to unforeseen circumstances or structural flaws, end up becoming unresolvable. It mirrors the complex and sometimes frustrating nature of human contracts and relationships, where intentions and outcomes are often at odds. In essence, the paradox of the court serves as a reminder of the limitations and potential pitfalls of relying too heavily on logic and structure when creating agreements, especially when the outcome depends on actions that may be outside anyone's control. In conclusion, the paradox of the court is a compelling thought experiment that explores the intricacies of contracts, promises, and the relationship between logic and fairness. It raises essential questions about the nature of justice, the role of conditions in agreements, and the ways in which individuals interact with the legal system. It remains a timeless paradox because it continues to speak to fundamental issues of human interaction, obligation, and the complexities of resolving disputes in a world that is often far from simple or predictable.